I wanted to ask you about the Mossad idea in regard to Epstein, because obviously this is such a contentious point for people out there. Like and this is to give you my general argument before you get into it, is it's kind of like you could make a clear argument that Mossad, CIA, whether or not very clearly overlap, in a lot of ways are one and the same. So you could argue that one or the other could be the same, like you're saying, the same thing. But clearly everybody's focused on the Mossad connection. And I've seen people like Moon of Alabama argue that they actually think it's much more likely that it's the CIA. So, what are your thoughts? And do you even think he's intelligence connected?
Oh, he's definitely intelligence connected. A creepy guy saying, "Come here, kids, look in the van." That's a regular pedophile. A guy with his own private island doing it and getting away with it and having the law. Like Barry Krishner, by the way, when you were asking about, or you made the analogy of the vampire, like guarding the blood bank or whatever, we're talking about Iran. This guy who was the lawyer for Epstein that helped him basically get off the hook with his sweetheart deal with Acosta and others, but he was his principal lawyer, and he runs children funds, as does Ghislaine Maxwell. They're all involved in like child organizations and whatnot. And
now you're talking about Dershowitz, yeah?
Well, no, Dershowitz is worse. I mean, he's been fingered by the ones he fingered. Yeah, gross. No, I'm talking about Barry Krishner. Not Kushner.
Okay. Gotcha.
Krischner, whatever. People can look him up. He's a monster. He got an award from the ADL, by the way, in 2018, long after defending Epstein's serial rape of children. No, it's state sponsored. Like, that's to be able to get away with it the way he has, and to be able to do it to scale the way he has, takes intelligence. And the fact that he had a sole client billionaire, Leslie Wexner, who's a Jewish billionaire, and I'm saying their ethnic group because they're prejudiced, not because I am. The specific ones I'm naming have this idea of ethnic nepotism. And so for a Zionist Jew, Israel is like their religion, their real religion, not Moses and all that. It's the state of Israel. And Wexner formed a group called Mega with the Bronfman family, hardcore Zionist, Seagram's liquor giants, Spielberg, who's also been accused of kiddie porn. Who else is in there? Like Steinhardt, Larry Steinhardt, all the, a who's who of the worst Zionists, all the ones that are always donating to Zionist causes. You didn't have Heinz Saban and Adelson in there, but basically all the rest of them. And Wexner was his sole client. One of the rapes occurred at Wexner's mansion. I think Framer was raped there by Epstein. He goes to his birthday parties. He always brings a new recruit in. Dershowitz was one of them at that time. But Wexner finances Jeff Epstein, and Wexner has this group, the Mega Group, whose sole purpose is a bunch of Jewish billionaires, and their sole purpose is to influence American policy to benefit Israel. And he set up the Wexner Foundation and put Epstein on the board of directors of it. And then this foundation donates to Ehud Barak, who's the prime minister of Israel, who's been seen at Epstein mansions and on his islands. We go, oh, I went to the island and I got a massage, but they weren't underage.
Yeah, there was one that was just documented of not Dershowitz, but the other. I just blanked on his name. We just mentioned it, but he went. Barak went up with the scarf around his face, trying to sneak in to see Epstein, and he got a picture of him and everything.
Pictures actually Netanyahu posted those because they're
because
here's the timing. Anyone wants to know why now? Benjamin Netanyahu basically tied in the last election with the Blue and White Party. And so they have to have another election. They had it. That was in April. September, they're voting again. Ehud Barak is also Likud, but he's a former prime minister. He's a big threat. Netanyahu's facing all his own corruption charges. So is his wife. Interestingly, when Ehud Barak was prime minister, the president, because Israel has a president and a prime minister, just like France, the president, Moshe Katsav, got convicted of rape Well, he raped Israeli girls, so he actually got prosecuted. But he bottlenecked it until a month before he would have had to resign from the presidency anyway from term limits. Then he finally resigns. Oh, wow, a whole month you lost. But he did get convicted of rape. And Barat was covering up known rapists over and over again. Their diplomat to Brazil, Ari Sher, was caught in a child porn and child pedophile procurement center with this guy named George Steinhardt, not to be confused with Michael Steinhardt of the Mega Group, but same difference, really. He was a Hebrew language teacher in Brazil. And I'm talking about like 8 and 9-year-old, like little kids that they had created all this pornography, and they had a ring there for Israeli tourists, rich businessmen and whatever. I don't know why there's so many people who want to engage in this kind of thing, but to go and rape little kids and view them and watch them having sex and making kids have sex with each other and all this stuff. It all got busted because George Steinhardt's backdrop in a lot of the kiddie porn was the ambassador's pool from the Israeli ambassador in Brazil. And so they're like, why are you doing this on government property? And then you see all these pictures of Ari Sher and George together with their ding-dongs out and just all the gross stuff. And Sher just fled back to Israel, and Ehud Barak protected him. And years later, I forget if it was Sharon or Netanyahu, but one of them tried to pass him off to replace a diplomat in Australia who had to leave because of his own corruption over there, and they tried to replace him with the child rapist. Australia said, no way. But this is the kind of thing, like, why could they do that? Because this story I just told you, almost no one knew. Brazil knew, but like it never hit the English media.
It's similar to Saudi Arabia, right? There's a trail of rape and abuse and drug use, and they just fly back to Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. ignores it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the Saudi Arabias, they're basically, it's practically genocide what they're doing to Yemen, definitely mass murder, and collectively just starving kids. And I mean, Saudi Arabia is involved in 9/11 according to our own government, right? Like the redacted 28 pages got into a little bit the tip of the iceberg of Omar Bayoumi and Osama bin Laden acting as middlemen for the Crown and Bandar Bush to launder money to Khalid al-Midhar and Alifa Hazmi. And there's another example of Hazmi and Midhar and I'm on a blank, but three of the hijackers in Louisiana, same kind of ordeal there. And our FBI knows this. We know they know this, and nothing. You know, the CIA had tracked these guys from their Al Qaeda summit meeting in Malaysia, where they'd met with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the real mastermind in 9/11. Knew they were Al Qaeda, knew they were involved in the Cole bombing, and let them use their real names and live in the U.S. and made sure, that Saudi Arabia is guilty of so many crimes. And one of these guys, Anand Khashoggi, who is the uncle of Jamal Khashoggi, the famous bonesaw man who was assassinated, he used to have rape cruises. Now, not with kids, but his yachts would just be filled with Eastern European prostitutes, many of them coerced. Like, oh, come here and be a nanny. Oh, now you're in a cage and you're going to be banging rich Saudi businessmen. He had a yacht, which Trump purchased, by the way. But they would just go around on a cruise full of prostitutes and do the most disgusting stuff, like peeing on people, pooping on their faces. The young blonde girls, they love that, and stepping on their hair and shatting on them and having a nice old time. They'd pay them real well. But so it was legal-ish because it was prostitutes or whatever, and it's on the open sea. And, when you're rich, you just have a different life. He ties into Epstein, too. I mean, it's
let me ask you this.
Because NSO was how they killed his nephew, was with the Pegasus software, which came from Promise, which Robert Maxwell stole, who's the father of Jesline. Mm-hmm. Who's helping Maxwell procure girls, doing the same similar kind of thing out there on cruises and on islands, raping kids.
Again, look at that. I mean, just the connection you're laying out. When there's more that you could continue on to connect these people to, it's crazy. I find it impossible that people could ignore that 1, 2, 3 coincidence, but this many. It just seems
I mean,
ridiculous.
it's not just like an Israeli guy or something. You've got a group of Israeli billionaires, Israeli firsters that finance Epstein. They created a foundation and stuck him on the board so he could finance an Israeli prime minister who's covering up cases of rape for his own president, his own diplomats, and then you see pictures of himself at Epstein's locations because he's raping kids himself, okay? They use this as blackmail on politicians, judges, etc., but a lot of them engage in it themselves because they're sick and because they have a God complex. Epstein has a God complex. He's like building his own fortress with tunnels and everything on 2 different islands. I think 3. I think Peter Island as well. But I don't have enough concrete proof for that, and it's not necessary because you always stick with, look, we already got him with Little St. James and Greater St. James. And he thinks, yeah, I'm going to build myself a temple, and, they're just going to have kids living there as sex slaves. And then he and his little pervert buddies used to go around clubs in France and drug girls' drinks and then just take them home and rape them. And he's getting away with it. Like in Florida, he made sure he paid off the cops so much that they couldn't do anything. And that sweetheart deal that Acosta gave him was illegal because, I mean, I'm sure you've already told your audience this, but the victims were not even informed, and their lawyer was asked if they signed off on it. He said no. He said yes, and that was it. And he was at large, and these guys are meeting with him after he's convicted of at least soliciting prostitutes, underage prostitutes.
Yeah.
Bear Stearns in particular.
I definitely want to talk about the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office and the connection and all that, and the Bradshaw. But before we get to that, on the blackmail discussion? Because it's so interesting to me from your research. We recently just talked about this in a different interview too. The idea of these blackmail networks, from dating back long time ago. And whether or not you think to some degree these networks were used to maybe potentially as grandiose of an idea as literally take control over the political system. Like to the degree, I'm not talking about like Israel, and that's another aspect today we could talk about, but I'm talking like the people back then, and maybe even was Israel back then, that used this system, infiltrated the political system and used it to, and maybe like now we're watching those people run this country. Like, is that something you think is even possible?
Well, if people know about J. Edgar Hoover and his G-Men, he was gathering blackmail on everybody. He had a file on everybody. And yeah, he was a closet homosexual himself, and he was banging Clyde Tolson, his partner in crime, in more ways than one. And Frank Costello and Meyer Lansky got wind of that. I've seen the photos of the fellatio on the beach. And the Israelis were running Lansky through Timur Rosenbaum. And so Israel has had blackmail on the FBI, which had blackmail on everyone else possible. They knew all of Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy's extramarital affairs. They knew Johnson was sleeping with Matilda Krim because she was an Irgun terrorist. Her and Arthur Krim were both Israeli assets. And she was banging the president the day of the Six-Day War begins. Of course, Johnson's aunt started the ZOA, the Zionist American, well, no, it was ZOC at that time, the Zionist American Council. She is a founder, right? His aunt. That's not a big distance. That's who really raised him, too. And that's why he's allowed the liberty to get attacked by the Israelis and did nothing other than say, I want the damn boat on the bottom of the ocean. I mean, they've had, ever since murdering Kennedy, they've had the special relationship, starting with LBJ. He gives them the war they want. They had him compromised. He's sleeping with an Israeli national. And there's pictures of them together. Like Lady Bird had to know. I mean, you look up Matilda Krim, and she's part of this AIDS research. I don't feel like getting into that. There's an interview I did with David Crown on it. But the big pharma is just as corrupt as they get, and the Israelis' fingers are all in that too. The thing is, if you listen to Sibel, regardless of some incidents she's had where she's just, gone over the edge and lost it. But early Savelle, before she got kind of gaslit, she did good work, and she was a FBI translator. She speaks Farsi, Azerbaijani, and Turkish. Azerbaijani is a Turkic language anyway, but she realized that we just don't have a lot of translators. And it's true. Like the cachet of information from 1990 that we had from the Amir Khan assassin had boxes in just plain Arabic, not in code or anything, that would have foretold the 1993 World Trade Center plot. They hadn't even read them. So our FBI, our CIA relies so heavily on the Israelis when it comes to intelligence in the Middle East, because they have all the translators and stuff. Nobody speaks Hebrew. Nobody speaks Arabic. Nobody, like, they aren't there. You'd imagine, no, come on, it's the FBI. Nah, even the Washington field office had 3 translators for Turkish, 2 for Hebrew. Like they in post 9/11, they were looking for all these translators for Arabic and stuff, but they never bothered. Like even after the World Trade Center had a truck bomb blow up in it, they still didn't correct that mess.
Now, do you think it's possible that they did see that and didn't chose not to say anything, or possibly an FBI connection? Because there's a lot of information in regard to the that bombing and FBI
that
ties
bombing
to it.
Specifically, they had a mole inside the cell, and they pulled him off because he wanted more money. And like, you idiots, that's
if you believe their story.
They're about to attack the United States, and they're building bombs, and you're going to take out your inside guy and go blind.
But again, that's if you believe their take on it, though, right? I mean, it's possible that the FBI is not telling the truth about that, right?
Well, I mean, the FBI didn't tell anybody that. We had to find that out. But what happened was their informant recorded their own conversations and then played them for the world and said, look, here I am, and all they're concerned about is me getting recording of the blind sheikh, right? Who our own government somehow issued a visa for. He's in jail in Egypt, and he ends up in Brooklyn. He never should have been allowed in the United States, but somebody put him there. The counterintelligence wing of the CIA wants Al-Qaeda to thrive because they need something to replace the Cold War to justify trillions of dollars of budgetary spending. So Al-Qaeda, I mean, the U.S. created Al-Qaeda. The Mujahideen brand, you know the whole story. The U.S. is working with Al-Qaeda now in Syria. So anyone that thinks that there wasn't a hand-in-glove relationship during 9/11 is really naive. And similar thing with the Contras in Iran, or Iran, not in Iran, in Nicaragua, but they call it Iran-Contra because the beginning of that off-the-books budget that the CIA was using to finance Contras started by running contraband into Iran against our own embargo, right? It starts with airplane tires and stuff. And guess who the middleman was? It was Israel, of course. People are like, what? Israel and Iran? Yeah, Israel was helping Iran. Israel helped Iran in the Iran-Iraq War too, because Iraq was their greater enemy at the time.
Oh,
I mean, that's a long story, but yeah, of course.
Israel was also deeply invested in Iran, while the U.S. had a puppet there too, selling them weapons. And
Jimmy Carter's book, was it called Peace Not Apartheid? I think Palestine, Peace Not Apartheid. Jimmy Carter, former president of the United States. You can't just dismiss him. He knows. He was the president. He had access to all the information that a person could have access to. And just flip into the table of contents and look at it. Israel was receiving 90% of its oil from the occupied Sinai Peninsula and Iran under our puppet. When Iran had its revolution in 79, they lost access to their own oil. And they had to return the Sinai Peninsula because they lost the Yom Kippur War in 73. So after 79, after 73, after Yom Kippur and the oil weapon from OPEC, before Saudi Arabia was brought into the fray, by 76, Saudi Arabia was brought into the U.S. nexus with Israel that had already existed since murdering Kennedy. And they created this thing called the Safari Club. And France, Morocco, Iran, until the revolution at least, were partners in this. And they used to go around and mess with Africa, just like the neocons started with Latin America. Like George Bush Sr. called them the crazies in the basement. Like, oh yeah, let them go mess around with Grenada and Guatemala and stuff. which we did invade Grenada, which is one of the dumbest wars ever. He let him mess around with Africa, but this clique and this intelligence nexus, when people say, I always hear this phrase and it irks me every time, like CIA, MI6, Mossad, blah, 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 blah. Like, quit doing that. Like, be specific. There have been groups that have existed since 1976 of Saudi, Israeli, and American intelligence network, right? It's an independent thing. It's a trifecta of evil, or whatever you want to simplify it as. And their role, because they need the Israelis for the intelligence and the linguistics and so on. They need the Saudis because they're the masters of laundering money. Because you got a royal family. It's real easy. You bribe 2 people, you're done. You don't have to mess with the division of powers or anything. And we know this. I mean, it's the Saudis that set up BCCI, which was how they financed the Mujahideen and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, BCCI got shut down in 93. So they just went back to the traditional CIA hub of Riggs Bank and narcotics and, A lot of it's narcotics. And that's why politics in Latin America is so important, because if you were to end that drug trade, Afghanistan too, if you were to cut off the opium, if you ended the war in Afghanistan and liberated opium, or let the Taliban burn the fields like they used to, you wouldn't have this massive multi-billion, maybe trillion-dollar budget for the CIA to play with to do things like financing ISIS covertly in Syria. That wouldn't happen. So it really comes down to the war on drugs and other things that you think aren't related, maybe not you, but the royal you. They are related. The war in Afghanistan is tied to the war in Syria, because if you didn't have the opium trade, you don't have the black market, and you don't have Purple Shovel and all these intermediaries shoveling money to HTS and al-Sham and all these other terrorists. They're all terrorists. I don't care how many times they rebrand. That's what they are. And you wouldn't have had 9/11. None of this stuff would have happened. But of course, Hillary Clinton, she had for women's rights, we had to go in and invade Afghanistan. We had to cut off their food aid, which means if they don't have money for food aid, what are they going to do? They're going to grow and sell opium, right?
Well, there's a really interesting, which I know you already know because it's in your research as well, but the idea of, so we're talking about the war on drugs facilitating a black market or, black ops for intelligence communities. Well, jump back 50 plus years in the Prohibition era, mafia, the same thing, right? We're talking about the same thing and the same blackmail system around it. So it's very
in Russia too.
One thing many people
Russia also outlawed alcohol.
Well, one thing, what'd you say?
Russia outlawed vodka.
Yeah. We always know that these kind of prohibitions facilitate a black market. That's the basic history.
Absolutely.
But one thing I didn't even know before I was looking into all of this is that one of the most prominent denominations in the mafia was actually Jewish, where you had Italian and you had Jewish was the predominant. And that's an interesting tie back to the same idea, right into the same thing. So we could literally be staring down the barrel of watching Israel use a blackmail network to essentially take control of this political system. Same kind of thing from before, Who
did Lansky send out west with first Bugsy Siegel, who he'd end up assassinating for losing money in the Flamingo Hotel? But the Flamingo Hotel was floated $2.1 million, which I don't know what that would be today, like 10 times that. By Hank Greenspun, who is a gun runner for Israel. He got guns, airplane machine guns out of Hawaii into Mexico and then over to Israel for their war. And he fronts the money, and then Flamingo Hotel and all. It just changed hands. I did this video about it. It's the Fertitta brothers from UFC ended up with it. But they're married into Mo Dalitz. Those are another Jewish mafia figure out of Ohio that went west. All these people that the early stages of Las Vegas and Hollywood are from the Jewish mafia. And you look at it today with the Harvey Weinsteins and stuff, and to bring it back to Epstein, who introduced Harvey Weinstein to Black Cube, the former Mossad agents that harassed Weinstein's victims? Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak, Prime Minister of Israel, financed by the Wexner Foundation, of which Epstein's on the board. Not only that, there's another connection. Epstein had this software company that went to Ehud Barak as well. it changed names. It was called like Reporty, and then I think it got changed to Carbine, spelled with a Y. And
That's right. Yeah.
that was $5 million or something to get that going. And of course, what's that do? It's just spies on sexting and whatnot. But that was Barat got into that. It was just a way of laundering money to Ehud Barat. Outside of, you're like, well, you can already donate through the Wexner Foundation. Why do you have this secondary thing? Because you want to have multiple ties so that if one card gets pulled out, the whole thing doesn't fall down. You have redundancy. So if you do get busted in one of these crimes, it's separate from this other thing, though. But they're all engaged in this stuff. Ehud Barat was raping little kids. That's what he was doing. He had to protect all these other fellow rapists that had these rings in Brazil. Then he had another ring in Colombia. Look up Israeli rape gang Colombia or something if you want to later. It's disgusting. And they own the hotels, like everything. And it was a thriving business. Israeli tourists would go to Colombia to go rape little Colombian and Venezuelan girls. Like, how is there a market for this? How do they know about it? They just go on Craigslist to be like, hey, you want to rape some kids? Come to Colombia. We got you. But that's the kind of state they have because Israel itself has been they've had this network of human trafficking since their inception.
And to answer your
but
question,
it started with fellow Jews, like desperate Jews coming from Poland, fleeing and going to Israel, and then they got roped up into getting sex trafficked to Ashkenazis.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And I think to answer your question there, I think the only way something like this could exist is being facilitated through a power structure. Like there's no way you could do it. You could have a bunch of, low level, white collar or blue collar kind of people that just decide to do it. But the problem is you don't have the connections. You don't have the money. You don't have the, these things aren't possible for this kind of level. So we have to acknowledge.
What's happened with Boys Town and Franklin Credit Union and stuff. It's always tied to a state. Always.
Exactly. And that's why it's also covered up. And, we could go off on tangents. You could connect this, the Clintons are an obvious connection. We have Clinton to Silsby and Silsby trafficking from Haiti. And, you can't deny all of these ties. Yeah. It's undeniable. And that's what's so crazy to me. But in regard to, again, back to Epstein on this and the
Hillary sleeps with women, by the way.
I've heard that as well, but I haven't seen the actual.
My mom's cousin was her bodyguard and witnessed her sleeping with women.
Oh, interesting. That doesn't surprise me. A lot of these people have beards and, for the political scene. But what Epstein just happened in his jail cell, right? Which everyone saw. How do you think that ties in with this? Do you think he was attempted
He's trying to pull a Wilson Fisk is what he tried to do. Look, I've talked to inmates and stuff. I did a big documentary on cops and da-da-da-da. If someone's going to go whoop your ass in jail, they're going to hit you. They're not just going to choke you. You're going to get hit. You're going to get kicked. All he had was little, light markings on his neck where he just sat there and choked himself trying to get a transfer. If somebody, especially in that prison, was going to whoop his ass, they would have hit him in the face. When you hate people, when you have crimes of hate, you punch them in the face. It's not the most effective thing to do in a fight. It just feels good, right?
What about a warning, though? What about a potential, somebody, because there's the idea is that the guy, Tartiglione, was seen with a mini cell phone like a week or a couple weeks before. So is it possible somebody was like, hey, send him a warning that he is not supposed to, spill the goods on everybody else. He's the fall guy. Get with it,
Nah, his lawyers were trying to get him in-house. That's a scenario, and that's fine as possible. I don't buy that, though. I think, just in my opinion, this is all, we can't prove this. This is all.
Yeah, we don't know for sure.
I know this personality type. And they're always the victim. Like, he didn't express any remorse. He's thinking, why can't I stay in my 77, now probably $55 million mansion? Why not? Why can't I just wear a leg bracelet like last time? Wah, This guy can't handle prison. This is the first time ever he's been to jail. Because last time, 6 days a week, he got to go out on leave for work release or whatever, and then he stayed in an apartment next to the jail. He didn't even stay in the jail. He's never been in jail. This is the first time he's ever been behind bars on a regular bed, not able to fuck children or whatever, and he's looking at his future like, this is the rest of your life. So he's like, I need to get trained. I need to make it seem like it's safe here, and then they'll let me stay in my house. This is how stupid and like this is the God complex this guy has. He chokes himself. I mean, they looked at his marks like, if it's a warning, then choke the mother effer, you know. But they didn't. He had little light choke marks on his neck, and he's in the fetal position where they find him. And it's all denied. Like, if you want to send a warning, break his nose or something, you know. That's not going to matter. Like, oh, I'm not even going to hit you. I'm just going to lightly choke you. Nah. He did that to himself to try and get transferred. I'm not buying it. If the Clintons want him dead, he's dead. Already dead. Yeah, they'd be like, go in there, hang him. You just kill him. It doesn't matter. Just go kill him and take the fall. You're in jail anyway. What do you care?
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we talked about the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office and where this all really comes from, and that ties in with pretty much one of the last things I want to touch on, unless you wanted to bring anything else, is the idea of Lauren Book, excuse me, and you probably saw the senator who is now being threatened. She claims anyway, it said, little girl, you don't know what you're getting into, because she's probing into what you just mentioned, which is the work release and how they were paid by Epstein to basically chauffeur him, and he basically had women coming to see him. Nobody was watching. They somehow lost, the people who were coming and going. And it's very interesting here. So, how do you add this into the whole story? What do you think is happening here?
I'll tell people this, and I'll ask them that they see the show notes and they'll go and watch this video, because I wasn't allowed to put it on YouTube. It went on BitChute. But it's called Epstein Helped Bear Stearns Hide Toxic Assets and Then Got a Bailout. So to what you were saying about Florida, the login notes where these cops are calling him the client instead of an inmate. One of the guys that visited him in person, couldn't call him on the phone or anything, knows that he's been convicted of, child prostitution minimal, was James E. Staley. And he's a corporate officer for J.P. Morgan Chase. And let me stress why it's even more important, and that's already sounds bad. But, he's working for Jamie Dimon. But Epstein used to work for Bear Stearns under Ace Greenberg. And what he did for them was he set up this company called Liquid Funding LDT in Bermuda. And Bear Stearns set up a company called Bear Stearns Ireland Limited to get around U.S. regulations. They had that company set up, Liquid Funding. Epstein is the chairman. Epstein finances 40% of it. Completely, and all this company did was buy toxic assets from Bear Stearns so that it would get those off its balance sheet temporarily. Because what they created is called an SIV, a structured investment vehicle. This is all in my book, The Separation of Business and State, by the way. Shameless plug. But an SIV is something that a lot of these people, Citigroup's the one that invented it, but they were all during the housing bubble fiasco. They would set these things up, and all it was is usually an offshore company that buys a bunch of toxic assets and debt obligations from a parent company, so the parent company can say, well, we are balanced because technically a separate company now has the debt. They've been paid for it. But then they have to go and sell these mortgage-backed securities or whatever bogus crap they just bought, and they can't. But what Liquid Funding LDT did was it issued a bunch of commercial paper. So basically, it's got an IOU to Bear Stearns, wink, wink, and then it creates its own bonds. And what commercial paper is, for those that don't know, it's just same kind of thing. You sell something, but at a really high interest rate, and it has to be paid back very quickly, like within 9 months max, right? But people do it, and they got false ratings on their commercial paper, AAA, which is the best you can get, and they got tier 1 status because they bribed the rating agencies, right? And what Bear Stearns was doing, another thing they did was they would they'd sell bad assets at the end of the month, so that when they got rated and people came and audited, and people came in, the rating agencies from Fitch and Moody's and Standard & Poor's and stuff would look at their books, and then they would buy it all back the beginning of the next month because they really still were stuck with all these bad assets. But what they were trying to do is through the commercial paper system is get these into money market funds, which they did. 139 million in Dreyfus Money Market, 125 million in Frank Russell Investment, and 100 million in JP Morgan Chase, right? And so Epstein is the facilitator of all this. He's the middleman that sets up this, floating shell company, liquid funding, finances at 40%. Of course, Epstein himself is actually being financed by Wexner and Co., this Israeli group. And then you had JP Morgan buy out Bear Stearns. But then after all that happens, okay, in 2008, and Epstein's supposed to be in prison, but he's going to work release, where young girls were witness at the house, he meets with James E. Stanley of JP Morgan. Right? So what was so important that he had to go to his house to talk to Epstein? Well, lo and behold, right after this occurs, liquid funding LDT reemerges, this time doing the same sort of shenanigans for JP Morgan Chase that they did for Bear Stearns. But what I'm thinking is both happened. Yeah, he went and maybe he talked to Epstein about restarting this Bermuda company so they could have the same sort of shenanigans they got away with last time, with it using a structured investment vehicle to hide toxic assets. And then get this, the Federal Reserve of New York spent $28 billion to JP Morgan's $1.2 billion to buy back the $30 billion toxic assets from Bear Stearns. And then JP Morgan Chase acquires the whole thing in a fire sale. But they didn't do this directly. They set up this thing called Maiden Lane LLC or whatever and had them front the money. But it all came from the New York Federal Reserve. If you go and you look at the boards of the New York Federal Reserve and JP Morgan Chase, et cetera, they all have something in common. And I'll just tell you some names: Jamie Dimon, Staley, Greenberg, Weinstein, Wexner. Who do they have loyalty to? It's not America. And yet they're not prosecuted. Wall Street is a criminal network, and they don't care what they have to do, who they have to steal from. It goes as dirty as not just ripping people off by putting toxic assets in supposed AAA rated market funds. They will sell kids. They will blackmail politicians. They'll bribe judges. And this includes the rape rings of Epstein. And all these guys are protecting him. He didn't do this by himself. Wexner financed him. And then Dershowitz and Weinberg. And my favorite, Gold Bergowitz are, I'm not making that up, that's his name. They're protecting him in the law, and a lot of them are engaged in it, like Alan Dershowitz is engaged in kitty himself. And I know I laid out a lot of names and stuff, but that's why I made a visual for this. And I said it better because I'm doing this off the top of my head, but there's a map that I was not allowed to put on, but the Florida logs have James E. Staley going in and out of Epstein's rape condo in Florida, in Palm Beach, Florida, with the police not inside. They're just standing outside like bodyguards. He's in there. They're raping kids or whatever, and laughing about it and setting up, oh yeah, we'll just make another SIV and move money around, ha ha ha. And that money laundering is how they pay for a lot of this stuff. Ghislaine Maxwell, same thing with their ocean funding in the UN, and I got a article about that too if you're interested in that. I don't have time to explain that, but it's
no, I just want to say
worse.
Let's be sure to be clear that we don't know for sure what was going on when they were inside that room. That's
yes, I don't know that they're raping kids. I just know he decided, instead of giving them a phone call, he just goes to a place where kids were raped to meet with them in person for 3 hours and then leaves. And who knows what they did in there. But we do know that liquid funding LDT resurfaced, and we do know they're still working for JP Morgan Chase. We do know JP Morgan Chase used the bailouts from the New York Federal Reserve to buy out Bear Stearns. And then you had the Federal Reserve put in $800 billion in bailouts for all these people. And what they do, and plus TARP, don't forget the Toxic Asset Release Fund. And all they did was spend it on bonuses. None of their behavior changes. Nobody goes to jail. and you can report on it till you're blue in the face. It doesn't matter because it's like who watches the watchers kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah. It's
what?
just, it sounds like a slice of the whole 2008 crisis. It's just all the
This is
same
why
stuff
they
that
don't
we're,
want me on YouTube. Like that, I can explain all this, and I can talk forever. Like every detail. Like pick. You want to know more about Dreyfus? Fine. You want to know more about Frank Muscle Investment? I can talk about this. But I'm not allowed to. I'm not allowed to make videos anymore.
well, we'll keep connecting and talking about all this stuff. I mean, the last thing I want to get that your take on is Bradshaw specifically, and the because this is what Lauren Book. I mean, because what you touched on there is obviously the larger. I mean, it's crazy again. How it's always important when you're listening to this stuff to take a moment and stand back and reflect on what those connections show you and how with impunity these financial institutions act.
Yeah, like we know this stuff. Like the stuff I said, it's in the GOA audit, like of 2011. The GOA audit says that they set up Maiden Lane and they gave $28 billion to buy up assets. So all this stuff is there. I wrote a book about it called The Separation of Business and State. That it's not just about Wall Street. I mean, that book goes into the MIC and all their shenanigans and stuff too. But it's just endless. But what pisses me off the most is we know they bribed rating agencies. We know this happened. And we know at least Epstein and most likely Maxwell are raping kids. But so far, nothing's happened. The only head to roll was Acosta stepped down from his labor
Which they always step down like that's somehow justified. Like, oh, well, okay, we'll see. He's penalized. It's like, come on. He stepped down. He didn't get held accountable.
Though. Back in 2005, guess who got the ball rolling to investigate Epstein for child trafficking?
Who?
Donald Trump.
Interesting. Why do you say that?
Well, Trump did it for selfish reasons. See, Epstein had this property in Florida he was going to buy out and flip. And he didn't think Trump really had the money to do it because Trump was acting like he was much wealthier than he really is. A lot of Trump's money was tied up in assets and stuff. This deals with the Kushners in real estate in New York and New Jersey. But Trump, in the 80s, he's like the richest guy in America. He wasn't, but it's just this, Trump is in love with Trump. And Trump went and visited the property with Epstein. Talked about the renovations. Epstein was saying, I'm going to do this and flip it and da-da-da-da. And Trump's like, oh, yeah. And then like hours before, Trump outbid him by $5 million, took the property and flipped it himself.
Sounds like something Trump would do. That's classic.
Epstein's like, I'm gonna tell on you for, I'm going to say what you did and show everyone that you don't really have as much money as you pretend to have and stuff. And Trump's like, really? You're going to do that? Well, guess what I'm going to do? Because Epstein this is why when he says he was banned from Mar-a-Lago, right? They're at a party together and the Democrats are like, oh, look, pictures of Epstein and Trump. Trump hated him. Epstein had tried to recruit girls from Trump's estate in Mar-a-Lago, little kids, like people's children and stuff. And so they told Trump, and Trump told the cops and tried to get the FBI to do it. And so that is what led the cops. And you got to realize Epstein's putting in hundreds of thousands of dollars to the police department in Palm Beach, right? Trying to buy them off. But there's a limit, when you're raping kids, a lot of people don't care how much money you're going to give them. But Trump's the one. Y'all can look this up. Trump gets the ball rolling on Epstein because of this stupid property both of them were trying to flip, and Trump ended up with it, and Epstein got mad. So Trump told on him for trying to recruit girls from Mar-a-Lago, bans him from Mar-a-Lago, doesn't talk to him for the next 15 years. It took a while, but by 2007, because you got to gather a lot of evidence on a multimillionaire, almost billionaire, and they did, and witnesses came forward, but then he got the sweetheart deal and got away with it anyway. But it's all come back to bite him in the butt again. Why? Because it interlopes Ehud Barat, who Benjamin Netanyahu is a political rival with. Now, I don't care that that's the reason. It's the right thing for the wrong reason, right? Like, yeah, you're just trying to take down your political rival, and it also embarrasses the Clintons and da-da-da-da. So, you know what? Barack and the Clintons and all them are guilty of all those things and should pay the consequences. So you usually never have a quote-unquote elite go down unless they're fighting with each other. Here's a great example of infighting. I love it when the roaches turn on each other. I just sit here with popcorn and laugh about it. And I hope it goes all the way up. I hope they get a lot of these people in these financial institutions. There's senators besides Hillary Clinton who were at Pedophile Island. I've got that on very good information, certain senators that were there.
Yeah, the book is circulating right now, actually, right? The information is now, everyone's talking about it today, I believe. All the names of just basically everybody.
Oh, is it? Okay,
yeah.
well, then I guess it has come out. I didn't know. I was sitting on the information because I like to super verify stuff because I don't want to get sued, you know.
Which is smart, yeah.
Yeah, but, you know, why else would you go to Little St. James? I mean, there's nothing there other than Epstein and his rape rooms. Like, well,
you do have Trump on the plane as well, which seems to kind of counter but you could make an argument that people went maybe
not to his island,
what they were getting into. You know, is that something you would consider?
Well, Epstein would try and compromise people, like Chris Tucker and stuff going to Africa. I think they just went to Africa.
Right.
You know?
And he's trying to get him in a position where he can hold something accountable.
But he's like, you know, putting you there for hours and hours on a plane with a bunch of kids that are like models from LC2 or MC2, excuse me, from Jean-Luc's modeling agency, and waiting for you to mess up or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my favorite is Clinton. I made them peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Like, how young were these kids? You know,
well, it's important for everyone to know too that it's very clear that this goes well past party lines. But it's interesting the point you made to kind of just finish this up today about Trump. It's very interesting because that seems to suggest something that's going to be really upsetting for a lot of people that only want this to be about Trump. When it's undeniably clear that the Clintons
Trump's guilty of plenty of other stuff. You don't have to admit anything.
It doesn't make him a good guy because he's not.
He's a womanizer, but not a child molester. He's into supermodels. That was his thing. He possibly had sex with Karen McDougal, playmate. I'm like, he's got good taste. I mean, his third wife, smoking hot, like whatever. But, you know, Trump's guilty of abetting Saudi Arabia's crime is starving kids to death in Yemen. He's, you know, cruise missile strike Syria. He's done a lot of stupid stuff. But the stuff they go after him about is like racist, concentration camps on the border. That's disgusting. A temporary detention center on the border, like every border has, is nothing like a concentration camp in World War II where people are murdered and starved to death. Like, they're not doing forced labor or anything. This isn't a labor camp. When you go to a port of entry, it's fine, but they don't. They're trying to illegally cross the border, and just because you bring a kid with you doesn't mean like now you're above the law. Like, yeah. If I rob a bank and I have my kid in the car, I'm going to be separated from my kid.
Right.
Duh.
But the real thing for me here, too, is to put aside the political, which you're not wrong, but to put aside the political aspect of that, because that's what they want us to do, right? They want us to get lost in that two-party divide, when in reality, regardless, they're murdering people in Yemen. You know what I mean? Like, that's right. Where, you know, that's the point. Is like, we have to recognize that is you know, while I made the same argument about what was before even the concentration camp comment was made, that yes, what's going on the southern border is something we should be concerned about, but there's no way we could pretend this is considered a state of emergency and not discuss the Yemen situation. You know? I'm
not saying it doesn't suck. I'm just saying don't make those kind of exaggerations, because that actually hurts your argument.
And like, again, while the U.S. is doing
concentration camps and drinking from toilets, like, they're not drinking from toilets. Like, you're actually losing sympathy. I have sympathy for refugees and all that, but I'm the one fighting for policies not to have predatory loans in Latin America, and to like the whole cause of the problem, rather than like messing around with the border. Why don't we stop intervening in different countries? If you export bombs, you import people. Exactly. And in Latin America, it's not war per se. It is. It's narco-socialism is what I call it. If we didn't have those policies in place, and NAFTA and a lot of other economic ordeals, then there wouldn't be so many desperate people trying to enter the United States from Latin America. Those are the things we have to fix, not just like building a wall Wall Rose or whatever to keep the Titans out or something. Like that's starting the story in the middle. You got to strike the root, but they don't get there. But yeah, Trump's guilty of plenty of things, but this one, it doesn't seem like if there was any evidence of that, it would have come out by now. He just wasn't doing it.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Well, we definitely got over some pretty interesting stuff today, and we'll definitely have to connect again. Before I forget, you had an Indiegogo thing you wanted to mention that you're working on, right? If you want to drop that for people and let them know what's going on with that.
Thank you so much. And like, you're the first biggest show I've been on since getting censored. So I got to really thank you for that. You're saving my ass here because I cannot reach my own audience. I'm going to Ireland. I've never been to Europe. I have some Irish heritage. I'm going to Ireland. The headquarters for Google is in Ireland for tax purposes. And there are a lot of Irish journalists and even people in Parliament who've had the same thing happen to them. Their social media has been canceled because the Irish government is full on BDS. They are currently boycotting goods from settlements in the West Bank. Good on Ireland. But Google, who owns YouTube, has a policy where you're not allowed to criticize Israel, or they conflate that with anti-Semitism, which is ridiculous, and shut it down. And they've attacked a lot of Irish journalists and politicians specifically to punish them for passing BDS. So I'm going to go there, hopefully meet with them and British journalists as well. And Robert Inlakesh from Press TV is going to meet up with me, Gilad Osman, and I got a list of people. I just got to get over there. And right now I'm not making money from YouTube, but I couldn't get super chats anyway, but at least I could do Streamlabs and the workarounds and stuff. I'm not allowed, I can't reach my former audience for this Indiegogo, but we've raised over $400 already, which is awesome. So we're on our way. So the link's below. And if I reach the full amount, I'm going to go to London as well. And that's really the cheapest way, is to just knock them all out in one trip instead of flying from Japan to Ireland and then later flying to London. Let's go to Ireland and then just go to London and then come back again. So I hope we can reach the full amount. And if you're in Britain or you're in Ireland and you want to meet up, definitely help make this happen. And also, when I get my YouTube channel back, or I build up a new one, you're welcome to come on my show. You're welcome to come on my BitChute, but it won't be very many. But, you know, I really appreciate you having me on and letting me go full autistic on these maps and stuff. There's links below for that as well too. I'll send you those if people want to watch the map videos, and if you're interested in the financial shenanigans, it all relates, because they're preying on these girls because they have enough money to just, they buy orphanages. Like, they'll get kids. Some of the stuff I didn't say, it's grosser than you can imagine. And we have an opportunity with Epstein to get a lot of heads to roll, assuming he survives to July 31st. So, yeah, help me get to Ireland, man. I really appreciate it. And there are some perks and stuff if you donate over a certain amount. So,
awesome. Yeah, well, that'll definitely be in the show notes, as well as the video you referenced, the map and everything else, and all your information for those that want to check out your information, your channel, and hopefully when it gets back up, for all those that may not be familiar with it.
Strike for this, but
well, you know what? At this point, I mean, it's funny you say that, and it's something I pride myself on. And again, just while I'm saying it, a shout out to all those watching right now. I am people funded from top to bottom, and I actually think it was a blessing in disguise about 6 years ago, more than that, when Google just booted me off AdSense. I don't make anything from Google. Everything is demonetized before I go live, whatever. And
I got booted from AdSense too. My AdSense is my wife's AdSense.
Right. And I just, but I a long time ago, I said, you know what? I was upset about it, and I started focusing on people funding. And now I'm at a point where this outlet is functioning by direct funding from people, Patreon, whatever else. So if I get shut down, that doesn't go away. Unless, you know what I mean? And that's what we could all be striving for. Yeah, that's our only real workaround today to fight against this control system they use against us financially. It's economic terrorism against Americans too, right? It's the way they control it, and it's important. So,
do you have a Discord?
I do, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I keep that as backup, because if they shut your Patreon down, if all your Patreons are on your Discord, assuming they're not all shut down simultaneously, you'll be able to find them again and find another way. we need to start making backups for even that, like Sargon of Akkad and stuff. Where there have been people kicked off Patreon.
Yeah.
My PayPal payments, they won't accept PayPal payments on Patreon. That's something they did, and that's not from PayPal. That's from Patreon.
Yeah.
So they're a little slippery too.
There's always ways they could do it. You know, that's the thing. At the end of the day, if they really wanted to, they could shut down, you know, from WordPress. You know, I've seen that actually happened to the Daily Sheeple. You know, they shut down their website directly from the hostings, which is crazy. But anyway,
that to me in 2018.
Yeah, you know, and at the end of the day, we see it happening. We know it's happening, and that's why we should, you know, those watching, make sure you support Ryan. Make sure you jump on and check out his Indiegogo, and we'll spread that around. And we're definitely going to connect again. I really enjoyed. You know, even though I usually don't let us divert that long, but I was enjoying the conversation. So, you know, I'll have to come back.
Style, man.
Hey, it's great. It's that I find to be the most entertaining kind of discussion because it's not organized. You know, we're just speaking off the cuff. We're enjoying things. So
yeah, we said we're gonna do ad libs. I'm like, all right, you're gonna get asked for. To me, it's not all over the map. Like, I've talked about this long enough that, like, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's all interconnected. That's what's so interesting about it. But we'll definitely get together again. Thank you for being here. And everyone out there, as always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.